We'll make a start. So welcome everybody. Like I said, it is really great to have you here for the webinar on feminism, religion and interreligious dialogue. This is a collaborative webinar brought to you by the Joint Learning Initiative, the JLI and KAICIID. And we're really excited to be doing this collaboration. We really believe that it is valuable for furthering our knowledge, our perspective, and collaborating together around different issues and areas of work. Hi, I can see Dr. Iman waving. Hi, all of you. So I'm aware that many of you may know the JLI or KAICIID already, but you might not know both of these organisations. So I'm just going to start by first of all introducing myself, because I realise I haven't done that, and then giving an overview into KAICIID and the JLI. So I am Lucy Gardner, and I am the Gender-Based Violence Learning Hub Coordinator in the JLI, that's the Joint Learning Initiative, and I have the pleasure of convening today's collaborative webinar. So to start off with, the JLI, the Joint Learning Initiative, is an international collaboration on the evidence of faith groups' activities, contributions and challenges to achieving humanitarian and development goals. It was founded in 2012 and built on a conviction to build a collective understanding of the potential of local faith communities. And the JLI is made up of a number of learning hubs, one of which is the hub which I convene, the Gender-Based Violence or GBV hub, where we have a number of practitioners and researchers from all over the world who are working in the area of gender justice, and we come together and we collaborate and share our learning, and there are a number of other hubs that the JLI also hosts, so if you're interested you can go onto the website and see if there are other hubs that you might be interested in finding more about as well. KAICIID is the only intergovernmental organisation governed by religious representatives and dedicated to the facilitation of dialogue between different cultures and faiths. Its unique mandate allows the centre to bridge the gap between religious leaders and policymakers in order to advocate peace and combat violent extremism. This approach is motivated by the belief that religious leaders and policymakers must work together in order to effectively address the many conflicts and problems in which religious identity is manipulated to justify violence. KAICIID equips religious communities with skills such as the understanding of policy frameworks, human rights, and sustainable development, while also training policymakers on religious literacy, interreligious dialogue, and inclusion. So welcome, as I said already, and I'm really happy to be convening today. So we have two speakers, Dr. Iman Bibars and Fatima Saeed. They're both going to speak for about 10 minutes on an area of their work, and both speak from very complementary but different spaces and contexts. And I'm really excited to have them both sharing their work, which kind of they share interests in influencing and advocacy and awareness raising, but they come from quite different areas. And so I'm really happy to hear those two perspectives and see where there are crossovers and differences and where we can learn together. I'm going to introduce each of the speakers in more detail before giving them before they hand over to give their presentation. Just a quick thank you again to Fatima and Dr. Iman for joining and sharing with us today. And before I get started, I just want to cover the house rules because some of you may not have been in one of our webinars before. So we have the great comment box, which you'll see, and it's a really good way of making connections with people in this webinar. So do use it to introduce yourself, your organisation, your role, so we can make the most out of having this virtual space together today. And it might be that you see people that you know already or those that you don't know, but you may be interested to follow up follow up with. So do make the most of the group chat on the side. Please remember to mute yourselves apart from when you're speaking. It just helps for us to follow one another better and have a really clear connection. And we'd love questions. So we really believe that these webinars are made so much more valuable by questions and observations and reflections. So make a note of those thoughts that you have throughout the presentations, and do type questions into the comment box. I'm going to be keeping an eye on them so that when we come to the end of the 2 presentations and we go into a time of question and answer, I will refer to those. And if you'd like to share through unmuting yourself, that's also fine. We'll just have to make sure there's a bit of an order to it. So I'll just pick out, hopefully by theme, different people's questions, and we'll do those. So I am going to start now by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Iman Bibars, a visionary for social entrepreneurship and women's empowerment. Dr. Iman is the Vice President and Global Diaspora Leader for Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, and the Regional Director for Ashoka Arab World. With her direction, Ashoka Arab World has expanded to 11 countries in the MENA region, identifying and supporting more than 100 social entrepreneurs. Dr. Iman co-founded Egypt's first microfinance organization, the Association for the Development and the Enhancement of Women, which supports impoverished female heads of households. With an international career spanning from UNICEF to the World Bank, she is a renowned social development expert, a sought-after trainer and consultant, and the author of several books. She holds a PhD in development studies from Sussex University and a BA and MA in political science from the American University in Cairo. She was a Peace Fellow at Georgetown University and a Parvin Fellow at Princeton University. Dr. Iman, it is great to have you with us, and I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation. Thank you so much.
And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am very honored and I'm very excited. We're talking about women. Can you hear me to start with? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Talking about women and system change and social entrepreneurship are my 3 most closest to my heart topics. And today, I think one of the things I would like to focus on is Islam and feminism. This is what I really think is the topic. And does Islam, in its current, interpretation, empower women or not? And does Islam in general empower women or not? And I think this is very important because I have studied religion, and of course I've been working on women empowerment. I am a Muslim and I'm a believer. So I thought this was very important for me to share with you. But also the angle also that I will share would be, how can we then work with the current discourse in a systemic change way so that we can really, highlight the true factors of the religion and how they address women's issues. Can you, the next slide, please? Somebody will do the next slide. Okay, nobody's doing the next slide. Okay, so the overview, I will talk at the beginning about my fundamental beliefs, because this is the core of where I see Islam as an empowering religion. Misconceptions about women in Islam, what do we mean by system change, and then the whys of Women Initiative for Social Entrepreneurship, and how a lot of our fellows, some of our fellows are good examples, are really using systemic change models or ways or methods in order to modernize the discourse and show and highlight how religion does empower women in our parts of the world. So this will be the overview. Next slide. Now the fundamental beliefs, as I said, I'm a believer, I'm a Muslim, and I believe that the Quran is the word of God, and I believe that God promised us that He will protect the Quran. So this is very important. and that it will not be tampered with. So for me, the main core of what we discuss about our religion, our relationships, our beliefs, how we react to each other, is really based on what the Word of God was. So this is very, very important for me, and that there is nothing that can then be contradictory or contrary to the Word of God. And this is important because you will see that in the Quran, there is much more sensitivity and empowerment of women than in many other interpretations by human beings. Next slide. Okay, it is also very important in our religion that there is no barriers between us and God. A Muslim is a person who surrenders. Islam means surrender, and you surrender your heart to God. And there is no institution between us or a broker. Excuse me? Okay. And we have the freedom to interpret religion the way we see it, and we're going to be judged accordingly. Sharia law is created by men, and that Islam cannot be against women. I think these fundamental beliefs are important because I don't know this audience, but when I presented this before, there are many people who are confusing the core of the religion with interpretations of the religion or things and interpretation by human beings. And it's very important for us to enter from this part of the world, from this angle, so that we can understand each other. Next slide. And I will give some examples of beliefs that are not the core of the religion. For example, divorce. There is, at least in my part of the world, where men can divorce women suddenly, or they don't tell them, or verbally. And there was a belief until we changed the law in 2000 that women cannot divorce themselves. But again, according to the Quran, women can divorce themselves, which is called khula. But also, if a man wants to divorce a woman, there is a whole system of doing this, where there is fairness, and there is a lot of justice, and there is a lot of respect. So again, this is the core of the religion. So that is important for us. The second misconception is polygamy. I mean, a lot of people talk about the right of Muslim men to marry more than one woman, and the claim is that it's only because of fairness and they shouldn't do this. However, if you read Surah An-Nisa and you read the first 6 verses of Surah An-Nisa and the verse 126 in Surah An-Nisa, you'll discover, and we're not going to go into this today, but there's a huge issue of was it meant all women or orphaned women and women under the guardianship of men? And there's a lot of debate and research and studies talking about that there is no polygamy to start with in Islam. So this is another thing, again, which goes back to interpretations, but not really the core of the religion. The next slide, please. Stoning and adultery. Now, in Surah An-Nisa and Surah At-Tawbah, these are the 2 places where women who have been doing adultery or being unfaithful to their husband should be punished. And actually, there is no stoning, although we see stoning in some of the countries, Islamic countries, of women who have been accused of adultery. It is not in both, the only 2 times in the Quran which is mentioned that the punishment of women and men who have been, caught in sin. So again, there is no way that then somebody comes up and says, but somebody, there is a saying of the Prophet that says this, because there is no way that the Prophet can contradict the Quran. The punishment is very clear. In Surah An-Nisa, they should be put in the house. In Surah At-Tawbah, they should be whipped, both of them. So at the end of the day, I'm trying to be very quick because of the time, but these are misconceptions that are very important, because these are the basis of how the Western world are defining our religion as this empowering of women, when it's not true. The next slide, please. Now, talking about my fundamental beliefs and then some of the misconceptions, it's very important to then say, okay, so what am I doing here? And what I'm doing is I am responsible for social entrepreneurship in Ashoka, and we want to use systemic change to change the discourse, the interpretations about how women are perceived in religion. And system change is really addressing root causes of a problem and changing the rules of the game. So if we're going to come in, for example, and talk about then what are we going to do about these interpretations and discourses, we go into how these discourses were done, who are doing these discourses, where they are coming from, going back to comparing it to Quran and saying, this is where we want to empower women again. Religion is very important for 1.7 billion people in the world. And unless we convince them that the interpretations they know now and that they are fundamentally not true, and that there is no way that there is a religion or a God who will want to discriminate against women, then we have a problem. The next slide, please. So system change therefore requires a breakaway from the linear relationship of the direct impact model and employ strategies based on scaling indirect impact. That's what I'm saying. We go in with a different angle. The mind shift is key to sustainable social change. We need to change people's perception that interpretations are the core of the religion, or that human beings, when they interpret for us 200 years after the Prophet has passed away, that their word is equal to God's word. We are allowed to interpret for ourselves if we are very well educated, or even if you're not. Next slide, please. So, doing this and deciding that we need to empower more women in our parts of the world, we developed WISE, which is Women Initiative for Social Entrepreneurship, and we developed it to work with our women fellows in order to empower women in different ways, and one of them was to redefine success, but also to redefine what the religious discourse is. Next slide, please. So WISE itself is a global collaborative initiative. We will identify and address gender-specific challenges that impede us from, becoming successful or seen as successful. And one of the main challenges we saw in our parts of the world was the religious beliefs, or we consider the misconceptions and misunderstandings. WISE also want to look at success from a gender lens. But for this particular webinar, it was very important for us to look at that how people understand religion, how people interpret religion, how people interpret women's position based on these interpretations have been one of the major challenges for the mobility of girls, for the success of social entrepreneurs, for the scaling up of their impact. And that's why we wanted to elect more fellows and work with fellows who are leading social entrepreneurs who are really challenging these discourses. And I will finish by giving you 3 examples of our fellows. Next slide, please. So we have 3 fellows, one from Libya, one from another country, and the third from Egypt. And these fellows are people who have really trying to leverage religious systems to improve society. Okay, next slide, please. So Ala Murabit used to work before it became so bad in Libya, but even after the revolution in Libya, she was working on the voice of Libyan women. And what was important was she wanted to shift the paradigm around the role of women in Libyan society. And she used the religious discourse, which historically perpetuated the problem, to positively reinforce social, economic, and political rights for women. So she looked at the religious discourse, the histories, the stories of the Prophet, and she tried to show that a lot of what's being said now is not true, and that women have really been, treated much better than a lot of the interpretations. She used positive references in the religious teaching to make a strong case for women equality in society. So again, using religion, and instead of using the negative things that have been spreading, but getting back to positive stories and showing to the community how, as I said, religion is very important in our parts of the world, so we had to use it, and she had to use it as a tool. Next slide, please. Bahijar Tulaka is a person who really worked with young kids in order to create peace and tolerance between Christians and Muslims. And so she developed a particular curriculum and trained a lot of young people. So her really ambassadors and the people who were spreading her word of wisdom were children, and she used the playground so that the children then start working together in a way that spread tolerance between Christians and Muslims. And this was very important. And again, this is systemic change because that was not done before. Next slide, please. Azza Suleiman, she's an Egyptian. And what was important for Azza again, was going back to the roots. So she was advocating for a new religious discourse. But what was interesting was she said that the discourse that came to us the last maybe even 500-600 years was not done the right way, the original way. So that through the creation of a multi-sector forum, controversial fatwas on women's issues were revised, reinterpreted to reflect changes in society's needs and demands. Through the participation and involvement of women organizations and but also different like legal people, social, religious, every other sector would come in, because in the past that's how fatwas were done. It was not just done by religious people. You had sociologists and doctors, and you had social workers, you had philosophers, and a fatwa was reached and legal experts based on the consensus of all this. And this is what Aziz Iman was reviving in order for us to address the issues and also address misinterpretations that was not modernized. So finally, what I'm saying here is that systemic change of leading social entrepreneurs address root causes, and they look at how we can really redefine how we look at things in order for us to prove that a point. And in this case, we are trying to prove that religion, and specifically Islamic religion in the Arab world, although seen as a challenge for women empowerment, can be used to empower women and showcase that women have been treated well, and that the Quran itself empowers them. Thank you very much. I hope I was clear, and after Fatima presents, I will be ready for questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Iman. It was incredibly enlightening, and I think personally for me as someone in the West, it's been really inspiring to hear you speak about women who are using their foundation in religion to find their voice and make change, and rather than allowing those false narratives of interpretations of religion, are actually going back to their core values and core beliefs, and using that as a really firm foundation from which to speak. So thank you so much for sharing. I am just now introduce Fatima Saeed. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Fatima. Fatima is an activist, researcher and development practitioner from Pakistan, an ardent supporter of the women's rights movement in South Asia. She has advocated extensively for the reform of laws and policies discriminating against women and children. Her efforts led to the establishment of a gender and child cell at the Provincial Disaster Management Authority in the government of Punjab, Pakistan, and the first ever mechanism for registration of home-based women workers in Punjab. At present, she is helping the Centre for Reproductive Rights expand the fight for reproductive justice in South Asia and Africa. She is a member of COFEM, on whose behalf she advocates for feminist-informed approaches to ending violence against women. She is a graduate of Columbia University and London School of Economics. Fatima, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today. And over to you whenever you're ready. Sorry.
Thank you, Lucy. So I'm here on behalf of COFEM. COFEM is a global community of feminist activists who come together to advocate for women-centered approaches to addressing gender inequality. And amongst a lot of other things that we advocate around, one of our core beliefs that efforts to address gender inequality must be led by women's movements. We believe that turning points in history, such as the Me Too movement, do not happen in a vacuum. And particularly in today's atmosphere globally, where there is a lot of backlash and shrinking space for women's organizations, and a lot of this backlash comes from religious circles. We must invest in women's organizations and local women's movement building forces to allow them to take a leadership role in making change for themselves at the national and local level. But at the same time, we feel that it's very important to look within these movements and understand that they, unlike other social change movements, they're not immune to power hierarchies and class interests. And recognizing that helps us build stronger movements. So today I will use the case study of the women's movement in Pakistan to amplify how there can be a tug of war between religious forces and the women's movement, and how they've come to a head at several times in the country's history. It's a particularly interesting case study because Pakistan is one of the only countries in the world, other than Israel, which is founded on the basis of a common religious identity. And so religion is very much a part of public and private discourse. And so there can be so much that can be said on the women's movement in Pakistan, but for the purposes of today, I'll focus on three main waves. Can you move to the next slide? And the next one, I just covered this. So for today, I'm just going to focus on three main waves and a feminist movement building in Pakistan, and how religious forces have rallied together to pass laws which are detrimental to women's autonomy, and how women's organizations have rallied and responded. It's important to note that a lot of the religious factions come together in Pakistan in the form of political religious parties, and they put their weight behind the government, and a lot of times this has taken the form of otherwise liberal leaders wanting to stay on to power, and the only way to do that is to for them to sometimes take religious parties on board, and often the bargaining chip is women's bodies and women's rights. So the first wave of a women's movement building actually goes back to pre-partition and the early years of the Pakistan as a country where it was formed. Women were very active in the struggle for the partition, and they came out. Muslim women came out on the streets. They were part of rebellious acts, and but as is the case, often we've seen in other parts of the world as well, once the country was formed, they were gradually pushed back into traditional domains. And at this point, an organization, All Pakistan Women's Association, was born. And this organization, even though women were very involved in very, political activities, gradually through this organization, the organizations who had been involved, the women who had been at the forefront of the freedom struggle became involved in this organization. But this organization was mostly involved in social welfare activities, and particularly the rehabilitation of refugees which had come from India. So they were mostly, and resultingly, the organization which represented women from all over Pakistan had a very congenial relationship with the state, and the relationship was one of mutual accommodation. And it is worth noting at this point that religious parties still disapproved of even this level of activity. And one particular episode which sort of illustrates how these opposing forces were all working at the same time was how the law on polygamy in Pakistan came to be. The law, which still stands, basically is a very minor effort to curtail the practice of polygamy, because it just it mandates that a man take permission from his first wife before he contracts a second marriage. But in the event that he does so without asking his first wife, the second marriage is not annulled, and there's a very minor monetary fine, which is not even paid most of the time. But it's interesting to see that even this law came about because the Pakistan's then Prime Minister, I believe it was 1955, was serving as the ambassador to the United Nations of Pakistan, fell in love with his secretary, and who was also a white woman, and married her as a second wife. Now, his first wife, who was in Pakistan at that time, was absolutely livid, and she was a very privileged and educated woman, and her comrades and her friends, who were also upper class women, were very upset that a woman could so easily be her life could so easily be upended. And they formed this movement. They came together in drawing rooms across Pakistan, and they were able to lobby over a few years for the passage of this law, which so it's interesting to see how even very privileged women working together who had, who had to outreach to the most highest circles of power were unable to ultimately advocate for a very strong law curtailing the practice of polygamy. The second sort of wave, next slide please, was the late 1970s, where a military dictator started widespread Islamicization of the country's laws, and that was his main platform. And amongst a lot of other laws which were discriminated against women, there were the Hudud ordinances, which basically, amongst other things, said that conflated rape and adultery, so that a woman who was raped, if she went to court and she was unable to produce 4 male adult witnesses testifying to the rape, women were not allowed to testify, non-Muslims were not allowed to testify. She was at risk of self-incriminating for adultery. And this came to a head with the case Fahmida versus Fahmida and Allah Baksh, where a couple was sentenced to public flogging because they married without the consent of the woman's parents, and even though she was not a minor. And so this made women all over the country very angry. And again, a number of women, about 30 women, came together to form an organization which still is very active. It's called the Women's Action Forum. And the Women's Action Forum was very radical in its approach, comparatively radical from that time. And they were, while strategizing, they were faced with a number of questions. Should they be religious? Should they use the religious arguments to make their point? Or should they be secular? There was disagreement within the group because they felt that Pakistan, the women from all different religions in Pakistan, and we want to represent all of them. So we should, we should use a human rights-based perspective. Some of them felt that making religious arguments, using religious arguments could be a never-ending cycle. But ultimately, they declared themselves a secular organization, but they did ally with some religious scholars to help them make a case for their point of view. There was also a lot of resistance within some disagreement within the group about whether there would be a narrow focus on women's rights or would it be feminism. And some women were uncomfortable because, again, these were women from a privileged background, so they didn't want to be, some of them didn't want to be coming across as anti-men, which is what feminism was and still is sometimes conflated with. So ultimately, as a result of these disagreements, WAF ultimately focused more on public discourse on women's rights, and as opposed to taking on issues that faced women in their personal lives as well. But WAF has been, very active. They've mobilized women, and they've actually really challenged the government and the religious establishment. Most prominently, even though the Hudud ordinance, they were unable to get the Hudud ordinances repealed, they were able to lobby for the passage of the Women's Protection Act in 2006, which moves rape from Shariat laws to now civil laws, where it can then be tried under Pakistan Penal Code. WAF has been, it still exists today, but it is different from the third wave, which I would say are the younger feminists who are unabashed feminists today. And these, the one main tool that sets them apart, the women's organizations of today, is social media. The power of social media, it allows them to take on issues that we could not discuss before, like, let's say, marital rape. So they've broken free, they've actually broken into the private lives as well, and we can talk about issues like menstruation, which was something that issues that were not really taken on by BAF. And today's feminists are more intersectional. They're from, again, social media gives them the power, from women all over the world, all over Pakistan. They're more diverse to be part of the discussion. And as far as the religious right is concerned, they are still very active. Just a few weeks ago, there was in one of the provinces, the education department has issued a notification saying that girls should cover themselves on the way to school and in schools, because that would avoid unethical incidences. And there was a lot of hue and cry and backlash, resistance on social media, and ultimately they had to take back the notification. So it's a constant struggle, a tug of war between feminist movements and women's organization and the religious organizations. And sometimes they manage to find common ground, but a lot of times, at least in the case of Pakistan, it is tenaciously holding on to whatever grounds they have. So I'll leave it at that, and I'd be happy to discuss more.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for that. That was very interesting, and I think sort of start to unpick some of the challenges that are faced by a collective female voice. I wanted to open up to questions that people might have. If you do have a question, please do unmute yourself or just type in the box. So I'm just going to leave just a couple of minutes now for people to collect their thoughts and start with some questions. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a question here from Angela Dora. Thank you for your question. The influence religions have had on the statues of women is very differentiated. To what extent have religions determined the status of women and the level of gender inequality it says inequality in level of gender inequality in Christian and Islamic traditions, but I'm going to pose a question to perhaps all religious traditions. So either Fatima or Dr. Iman, if you'd like to take that question, that'd be great.
Okay, this is Iman. Thank you so much, Angela, for the question. I think, again, when we say religion, I think this is where, because there is religion as a core, there is religion across history, and then there is the interpretation of religion. But I think in general, whether it's Christian or Muslim, religion has, of course, affected everyone. It affected the social structures, it affected family relations, it affected the relationships between people, whether positive or negative. I'll talk about Islam itself. At the beginning, when Islam was introduced, can you hear me, guys? Okay. Can people, yeah. So when Islam was introduced, it was revolutionary. When Islam was introduced, the way women had inheritance, that was not the case. Treated, that was not the case. Organizing marriage and divorce, organizing inheritance, organizing a lot of things. At the beginning, for example, I think the introduction of the religion and how women were treated was very revolutionary and was very empowering. But of course, across history and how it was interpreted, I think for a long time now, because of misinterpretations, the Islamic interpretations and discourse has affected women negatively in the eyes of the women themselves, but also in the eyes of, the Orientalists, people who came from the West and tried to interpret certain traditions to become Islamic. And I'll just give one last example where also Islam, religion, and traditions are confused. In Egypt, FGM is very prevalent, and it is associated in the West with Muslims, but it's not true. It's an African habit Saudi Arabia does not have FGM, yet, you know, mutilating women and trying to curb their sexuality is really not, you know, by cutting a piece of the women, is very widespread in Africa, in Egypt, but it's not widespread in Saudi Arabia, and it's not part of Islam. It is widespread in Egypt among Muslims and Christians. So again, I kind of get a little bit worried when we say just religion. I would rather call it culture and interpretation of religion. Thank you.
I would like to build on what Dr. Iman said. I agree that there is a lot of times what is culture from a particular region is mixed up with religious traditions. For instance, in South Asia, there are certain traditions such as giving dowry, burning wives, honor killing. These are not, they have no space in the religious discourse, and there is no, at least in Islam. So there's a lot of conflation of religion and cultural practices, which is often which is mixed up often. The other thing that I think is worth noting is that there are different issues which are on women's rights, which are taken, which are more prominent in certain religions. I having lived in the US, I feel like the issue of abortion is very is associated with Christianity here, and it is a major issue within religious discourse here. Whereas even though abortion is not legal in a number of Muslim countries, but there are other issues such as polygamy, which are more mainstream in the religion and women's rights discourse in certain countries. So there is that, just the way that societies have evolved and religious discourse has evolved in different countries. I think we have, as societies, picked on different issues and really focused on how they impact women's lives in different ways in different countries.
Thank you so much. We've also got a comment from Amel. As I might analyse it, the status of women has been determined originally from the patriarchal societies. Most religions have just built on the same structure, and that is why they are blamed for the degrading status of women. Thank you so much for that contribution, and thank you, Dr. Iman and Fatima, as well. We have got another question. I'm just going to try and find it. I think it's for Dr. Iman. The examples you gave of fellows are more about female feminist activists. Don't you think the impact of your work could be felt only if there are allies from within the traditional structure of religious authority?
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, no, there is no change without involving everyone, and in particular the traditional partners. And in the cases of Ala from Libya, or Azza from Egypt, or even Sakina Yaqubi from Afghanistan, there is no way. The main partners were people who are religious imams or religious leaders, people from the Azhar in Egypt and from other groups, and teachers and legal experts and NGOs, because there is no way that we can work on changing mindsets and shifting the mindset or the paradigms that are so engraved in our consciousness without involving everyone. So I totally agree with you. And of course, with Azza Sliman, for example, in Egypt, when she was creating a new discourse, there were champions in Al-Azhar and many of the people from Al-Azhar that were involved in this multi-sectoral approach of redefining and reassessing the discourse of our fatwas against women. And the same thing with Ala Murabit, and especially with Sakina Yaqubi, when she worked with a lot of the traditional leaders in Afghanistan and actually in Pakistan, by the way, Fatima, and where she was working with them in order to allow girls to go back to school. So it depends, but I totally agree with you. And there is no way that we work alone, or even that we work in a confrontational way. We actually, every one of these fellows is working in a very collaborative way, in a way that we are not confrontational. We are all believers. We are all people who want to work and to improve the image and to really go back to the core values of our religion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iman. I did have a question myself for Fatima. As you sort of alluded to at the end, there is kind of a new wave of feminists coming through in Pakistan. And I was wondering what you saw as the future for collective female voice. How do you see the future panning out?
So I think it is, there is a book on the women's movement in Pakistan. It's aptly titled Two Step Forward, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back. And I think that really encapsulates how where we stand, and not just in Pakistan, but in the world over. And so I think it's just going to be struggle. It's just, a lot of discussion. I think younger feminists will continue to use the tools at their disposal to contest some of the more conservative interpretations and laws and policies which, make decisions on women's bodies without including them. I think there has been, but at the same time, there has been a lot of positives have come out of the evolution of the women's movement, at least in Pakistan. And I feel like a lot of younger women are getting involved, and younger women are taking on issues which were previously considered taboo. And I feel that the changing nature of the world itself, it's there are fewer boundaries, there are fewer, you have more access to just resources like this webinar, where you can get new perspectives, you can get inspired, you can get more information to challenge certain narratives. And I think that will really shape the future of the women's movement, not just in Pakistan, but also the world over.
Thank you very much. So we have some more time. If people have more questions, please do ask them. I'm just going to pause for a little while just to see if anyone has any more questions before we round up. Okay, we've got another question from Angela. Thank you so much for your question. What do you think is the best way to find a balance between reproductive and women's rights on the one hand and religious conservative influences on the other hand? And I'm going to hand that over to Fatima for answering. Thank you.
So in our work, we tend to take sometimes, I think it really depends on who you're speaking to. A lot of organizations tend to take a human rights-based approach. They tend to focus on arguments and the rights set out in international conventions. But I believe another way of doing it is to hold dialogues with the religious scholars and find that balance. I think it's a very fine line to walk, because again, as a feminist myself, I feel that a woman should decide what happens to her body. So giving somebody else that power to legislate on behalf of women it can be it can be unfair to women, but I think women need to be part of all these dialogues and really work towards reaching a common ground. I think ijtihad is a very is a core value of Islamic mm, uh, judicial discourse, and there we need to engage more and really find ways to collaborate and to find a common path forward.
Thank you, Fatima. Any other questions from anybody online? Okay, I think I'm going to draw us to a close. Thank you so much, firstly, to Dr. Iman and Fatima. It's been a pleasure listening to you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts and your work. It's been great to have you with us. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. It's been great to have you all. We've had a good number of people, and thank you for those who have asked questions. And I really hope that you will join us again for another one of these webinars between the JLI and KAICIID. And until then, take care, everybody. And there will be a recording of this if you'd like to share it with any of your colleagues. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.